Next up, we're going to have a panel about strengthening regional response to high-risk watercraft. On this panel next, we're going to have representatives from the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment, the British Columbia Ministry of Water, Land and Resources, the Manitoba Department of Environment and Climate Change, the Alberta Environment and Protected Areas, and Montana Fish and Wildlife. So if everybody wants to come up and we'll start the panel discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've had some really great presentations and we've had a chance to cover quite a wide range of topics related to watercraft inspection, but we have a wealth of knowledge and experience in the room today. And so we wanted to have the opportunity to talk a little bit more openly with the group and kind of open things up for some questions. But really what we wanted to kind of focus on with our panel was strengthening regional response to high-risk watercraft. And we've had a lot of discussion today about things like CDD and, self-declaration of clean, drain, dry, and kind of an understanding of what that means. And in the AIS world, for the folks like us who eat and breathe and sleep this every single day, hearing things like clean, drain, dry means something very specific to us, but that might not be the case for everybody else, and within the public and within the room. So I thought I would open things up by asking how the jurisdictions classify a high-risk watercraft, and take it away. What is a high-risk watercraft?
Yeah, I can start and maybe pass the microphone down. It's an interesting question because and something that I think we contemplate on an annual basis. It's based on a lot of factors, but I do think I'll mention a few of them. So when we look at things like that heat map that I think has been shown maybe in 3 or 4 presentations so far, it really highlights where AIS is relative to Saskatchewan. And I do think we have a tendency to really kind of hyper focus in on zebra and quagga mussels and now golden mussels. And for good reason. Those species pose probably the most significant economic and socioeconomic and ecological threat to Saskatchewan and the Pennoir region. But it doesn't paint the whole picture as it relates to AIS and the risk that things like the movement of watercraft pose to Saskatchewan. As Tom mentioned, they're dealing with Eurasian water milfoil, and that's something that's being moved around within a jurisdiction. It's also not something that's represented on some of these heat maps that are focused on invasive mussels. And so we do take a lot of factors into consideration when we are trying to identify risk related to watercraft. A lot of those metrics are things that we use internally when we're interacting with watercraft that are, approaching and at watercraft inspection stations. But at the end of the day, I think really for us, it comes down to whether or not that boat is clean, drain, dry. Really, at the end of the day, that is what defines risk in a watercraft, because it is not just mussels that are being moved by a watercraft. There's a whole bunch of other species that we really don't want to ever end up in Saskatchewan or into any of our neighboring jurisdictions for that matter. We talked about the risk of water movement through a watershed and how something that gets infected upstream is inevitably just going to naturally infect everything that's downstream of it. We don't want any of this. Any of these species within the Pennoir region. And at the end of the day, risk for us is absolutely defined as to whether or not that boat is clean, drain, dry. Doesn't matter if that boat is coming from Minnesota. Yes, of course, at the end of the day, for us, it helps us to assess the overall risk of that specific watercraft. But if that watercraft is clean, drain, dry, coming from Minnesota, at the end of the day, that watercraft poses no risk to Saskatchewan, and that is really what we base risk on as far as our province is concerned.
Yeah, and I think really just building off of what Matt said, for us in BC, it's very much a similar approach. Of course, we have the similar focus on invasive mussels, and of course that informs where we're placing our watercraft inspection stations, because we're still in a prevention approach. So we're targeting boats coming into BC when we're looking at risk from an invasive mussel perspective. But in BC, something that we've been more recently facing as well is whirling disease. And, that really brought home the importance of looking at boats coming from into BC, but also stressing the importance of clean, drain, dry for interprovincial, kind of that movement within BC. We do have milfoil in BC, and part of the messaging too is that we don't want to see it spread into other parts of the province. And so that's where ultimately at the end of the day, it really does link back to that clean, drain, dry. And there's going to be different ways that we kind of approach addressing risk based on kind of what we're focusing on. But really for us, coming back to the goal for every inspection coming through our stations is to see that boat leaving clean, drain, dry.
I can't put it any better than that. Yeah, that's spot on. But also something we discussed yesterday. So Montana prohibits the transport of surface water. And so that's something in rule. We have something to consider. If enforcing it's tough, but at least you have that line in the sand that says you cannot do this because of the risk of movement of invasive species.
For Alberta, and the purposes of watercraft inspections, we've kind of started to train our seasonal staff who are doing the inspections to consider anything outside of British Columbia and Alberta to be high risk. We have a bit of a partnership with British Columbia in terms of a passport. Doesn't mean you can't. You can bypass our station, you still have to stop, but it was just getting really complicated for our seasonal staff every year in training. So we just said, let's not talk about the type of watercraft. Of course, it has to be clean, drain, dry, but if it's outside of BC and Alberta, just general high risk.
I stuck on here too. I was told to. No, everything everyone said, it makes absolute sense to me. Clean, drain, dry is the goal for sure. I just think as well, we touched on the bait pathway a little bit here. Opportunity to talk about bait when that watercraft is stopped. Bait is a huge risk, whether it's fish diseases or potential invasive fish transported as well. So just another opportunity for sure. But high risk being clean, drain, dry, or clean, drain, dry watercraft are the goal, and high risk watercraft are ones that are not clean, drain, dried.
Okay, and we also have Jeff Long on the line. So Jeff, go ahead from a Manitoba perspective, please.
So I'm going to give you two perspectives on risk. We look at risk on one hand as, and I mentioned this in my discussion earlier, probability and effect. By law, we treat all vessels as equally risky, and we take the CDD and decontaminate when necessary approach as treating as a risk mitigation. That said, there is risk within risk. So some vessels, some water type are just riskier than others. Large sailing craft, large complex vessels like wake boats, they present more opportunities for these, after all, very small things in many cases to hide, so and stay damp and thrive. So there is a risk within risk kind of thing, and I would like to echo something Matt said. All of these factors are sort of how you make the sausage, and in some ways we need to emphasize the broader message about CDD is really the outcome. If you're those things, if you're truly clean, drain, and dry, then you're not a risk. It's how you get there, and part of the high risk or low risk is what are the factors that go into to deciding whether or determining whether somebody is CDD or some vessel is CDD. And so there's some nuance there. There's some experience. There's probably as many opinions as there are people on just, is that truly clean? There'll be some who say that's clean and some who think it's not. And I think Tom, maybe it was, who said that, or perhaps perhaps I'm misattributing that, but it was one of the earlier presentations this afternoon. So I think we need to recognize that sort of there's an individual sense, there's a legal sort of sense in some cases, and there's this just general understanding. All of those things get packed into it. That means that there's going to be some variability. And as a consequence, that's important for people who travel across the jurisdictions, maybe not to get the perfectly identical message. We probably need to recognize there's going to be a little bit a little difference in the delivery of the message because the messenger is different, although we try to get a consistent message that CDD is the way to mitigate risk, no matter how we might decide what risk looks like.
Great, thanks, Jeff.
I probably could have said that in fewer words, right?
We welcome all of your words, Jeff. Okay, and I guess just for the sake of folks online, most of you have seen the presenters on the panel, with the exception of Cindy, so I guess we should have introduced ourselves. So please, before you speak, just do kind of introduce yourself. So I'm Jeri Geiger. I'm the team lead for the AIS program here in Saskatchewan. So thanks for pointing out kind of that there are some nuances and some differences with respect to maybe our decision flow or decision making process to, you know, whether we address risk, but that ultimately what we consider to be a risk is something that is not clean, drained, and dry. So the question is then, what tools or options are available for mitigating the risks a watercraft poses if they're not clean, drain, dry? And what mechanisms are in place to address high-risk watercraft moving through the region?
Sure, I can start. I'll introduce myself too. I wasn't a speaker previously. I'm Matt Tyree, for anybody who doesn't know me. I'm with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment, and I'm the Director of Fisheries. The AIS program falls under fisheries in Saskatchewan. Yeah, it's a great question. I'll maybe just touch on a couple of things and provide an opportunity for others to share their perspective as well. I would just say, you know, one thing that inspection stations are great for inspecting watercraft. Obviously, that's their primary purpose. We're there to intercept watercraft. We're there to address any risks that are identified through that process. Clean, drain, dry, CDD, as it's been referred to lots today, is what we are looking for when we encounter a watercraft that is not clean, drain, dry. That's an opportunity for us to then decide what to do with that watercraft. And there's a lot of options that we have within our tool belt. One of them that you've heard a lot about today is decontamination. Generally, our watercraft inspection stations in Saskatchewan, at least, have a decontamination unit that's there and it's available for our inspectors to use when they do encounter watercraft that are not clean, drain, dry. And it's determined by the inspector that the best course of action is to follow through with decontamination and send this individual on their way. But one thing I would just want to point out adjacent to the decontamination, I think that kind of interaction and that flow is what generally people expect or have come to understand about watercraft inspection and how watercraft inspection is managed. But I will say one of the real opportunities when dealing with boats that aren't clean, drain, dry is that educational piece and that opportunity to interact one-on-one with a boat owner on what clean, drain, dry actually is and where they have failed inspection, to be able to point out specifically to them and say, look, like this is what we've encountered. This is why this is actually problematic. This is why we're actually concerned about it. And this is what could result from your boat not being clean, drain, dry in this fashion. And this is what, you know, in order to allow your next interaction at an inspection station to go relatively quickly, this is what you could do to change that the next time that you come through. And that touch point, that opportunity for education and awareness is huge for us. It's huge for everybody across the Penwar region. Every opportunity we have to interact in that manner with an individual, providing that education, really works to ensure that hopefully there's one less watercraft traveling around through our jurisdiction that's no longer not clean, drain, dry. Now, of course, Brendan provided some concerning stats with respect to, you know, the individuals who are repeat offenders for clean, drain, dry. But that's actually also really good information for us as well, too, because it tells us that we need to be changing our messaging, or we need to be taking a different approach with respect to how we're educating those individuals. And we continue all of our programs, continual improvement. We like to routinely assess our own ability to be effective in things like education and awareness, and it provides that opportunity to kind of go back, talk with our stakeholders. Sometimes it's just a matter of dealing with a very specific user group, and we need to find a better way to message that group in particular so that that message resonates, and we see improvement in that moving forward.
So I can go next. Totally echo Matt's comments, and maybe I'll touch on a little bit some of the kind of regulatory tools. So something that's a little bit newer in BC, but it has been in place across other jurisdictions for a number of years, is pull the plug. It's now a requirement in British Columbia. It has been in other Western provinces for several years, and this really provides that sort of sort of regulatory hook for a critical step of that clean, drain, dry process with that kind of drain step. And so that's something that these are some of the regulatory levers that we can work towards to help achieve, again, the clean, drain, dry goal. And another piece that we have in BC with our program and how it's delivered is that we work directly with our conservation officer service. So they actually oversee the operations of the inspection stations, the hiring and training of our inspectors. And it's, I think, been a really great model for us in BC in terms of having that direct sort of line and support with our enforcement, and kind of bringing in that component of it as well. And so it's kind of a bit of a blend between the sort of maybe more science and enforcement realm. I think for us has been something that's been really great to have that sort of joint approach. And I think also too, just reinforcing what's been said already about the importance of that inspection process, because I think that is a really important tool, because as was pointed out in the first question around, really there's so much that comes from that visual inspection and from understanding what needs to be done from that inspection to achieve CDD, and it can really look different depending on the type of boat and the complexity of it and what tools you're going to need. So
Nothing really to add to all that, except one tool that Montana has that's unique, I think. So we can mandate a dry time. We find a boat with mussels on it. We can mandate a dry time by locking the boat to the trailer to make sure it doesn't launch, which is a great tool, only with mussels. But that allows us to follow up when it gets to its destination, make sure we can make sure it's totally decontaminated. It has that 30-day dry time, which is also required by our law. And other destinations, like Martina has a key, so she can unlock these things when they pass through Montana and go up to BC.
Thank you. Cindy Sawchuk, I'm from Alberta, and stay around because I'm presenting the last session today. So, so in terms of how we deal with high-risk boats in Alberta is not dissimilar to anywhere. And I just really want to reiterate that education and outreach is probably the most important tool that we have in our toolbox, because there is no way we can inspect every single boat coming into Alberta year-round, 12 months a year. And so getting the message out of clean, drain, dry, explaining what that means, what it looks like. People lie apparently when they say their boats are clean, drain, dry, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, whether or not the lying is malicious is another question for sure, and something, that's a great social science question for sure. I agree with everyone has already said here. I would just add on two things. I mentioned we're going to our 5th year for our border inspection station. Our officers feel like 5 years is enough to, let's start doing some enforcement that involves ticketing. So that's really interesting. Looking forward to see what that looks like this year. Additionally, as well, DFO is working towards building a national decontamination standard. So basically a document that's going to say, like, we believe a proper decontamination is going to hit X, Y, and Z. And we're working with the provinces as well as some folks in the United States to help build that. And we hope that's going to be a useful tool that'll help guide what decontamination means. So maybe someone in Ontario can start picking that up and administering that, and hopefully help deal with those source populations and problems.
Jeff, do you have anything to add online?
Would you be surprised if I said no? Couple things. On those CSA standards, that is it's a shared thing with the federal government and the provinces across the country. And I think that is an important thing because it's going to bring a lot of collective wisdom. And while this is not directly germane to the question, it kind of is slightly indirectly. So I'm going to make one point and then one more. The indirect point is, I think there's something called the Delphi method, where you get a bunch of experts and they go around a room and they'll give their opinion. And as you keep going around that, you find out that you start to coalesce around a central perspective. One of the advantages we have with these relationships, and it's often hard particularly for, say, the public to look at, well, government services, people traveling to these things. the real value, I think, is, and I'm missing this out, is the opportunity to meet people face to face, hear their perspectives, sort of choose some of those things over quietly, test those things. I feel I have a very good relationship with my colleagues in the room there, but I don't know them all as well as I would like. And it's a great opportunity to sort of get the perspective, and you start coming to a consensus, and then this leads to cohesion and cohesiveness and consistency for the public. And it also, you want to make sure it's correct. You don't want everyone agreeing to the bad thing or the wrong thing, but that's really valuable. And so those relationships are something that are foundational and need to persist. As soon as they start to evaporate, the whole thing crumbles. We all have our own programs and our own legislation, but the coordination and the consistency and the overall calmness and deliberateness now. And this is one other thing. There is a deliberateness to these programs across the West. And even though I'm speaking technically from Eastern Canada, because I'm on the other side of the center of Canada, I consider ourselves part of Western Canada. Across the West, there is a deliberateness to these programs. We're now old enough in the tooth, long enough in these programs, that we don't panic with things. And that's really important. It gives a sense of maturity and a sense of, we know what we're doing here. This isn't a bunch of high school kids running around. No disrespect to high school kids. I've got, I'm still one of those, but it's the maturity about, we know what's happening. And so this helps with the educational touch points that both Matt and Martina have talked about, is to convey that message of, we know what we're doing. You have to believe and know what you're doing. We're not selling anybody something here. We're just doing it. And I mentioned earlier, we have one of our stations that we've had to put in a way that doesn't serve West all that well, because we've got a logistics problem. So we've moved it somewhere else inside Winnipeg. What we did notice there are people are coming, as I mentioned, from their home to that station. It's not intercepting them. They're coming to visit so they can do the right thing. This is a shift in mindset. I don't know, I can't speak for other jurisdictions, but I suspect you're not seeing the same pushback. You're going to still see angry people. You're going to see people who are frustrated and impatient. We get that. But there's an awareness, this is now normal behavior. And it's an acceptable thing for people to say, this is part of the route. This is a little anecdote. I think it's important to me, and I hope it's important to others. In February, I run a cross-country ski club. We had a big race. It's a 30-kilometer race. One fellow showed up for our 30-kilometer race, but his father had just passed away from cancer. So as part of his Cancer Awareness Month, instead of skiing 50 kilometers in the month of February, he was going to ski 50 kilometers that day. So he skied this 30-kilometer race, then he did another 20. So he came into the clubhouse after this. He was a bit tired, and we were having a bit of a debrief from our race. And I also happened to know this fellow because he wanted to paddle through one of our control zones, and he was willing to paddle down the Red River into Lake Winnipeg and up the Winnipeg River and take a change of clothes and take a propane stove and equipment so he could decontaminate his paddling gear. So as he left from one control zone to the other, that was what he was willing to do several years ago. So he's a dedicated guy. So we're talking, and he says about the ski race and so on. And then his wife interjects and says, because she knows this role, she goes, if you guys could make an arrangement on those watercraft inspection stations, because I really like Dr. Pepper, and I can only drink a Dr. Pepper as we travel from where we live in Manitoba through to the mountains. I can only go so long in the truck, and Sean won't let me stop unless we're stopping for a watercraft inspection station. So if you could arrange those stations to suit my bladder, that would be great. I said, well, we'll see what we can do, but we're not going to do that. But the interesting thing was, she understood that this is just part of the normal routine, and they were going to be stopping at every watercraft inspection station between Manitoba and the mountains. She wasn't likely stopping in two of the jurisdictions they were going through, but it was just normal behavior. And I think normalizing it is really, really important. I think we're really starting to do that. I really feel that. I'm not just saying that. And this is a message for decision makers there's a recommendation, is never let these programs wither to the point where you can't maintain that connectivity. Once we lose this connectivity, it starts to swirl off in its own direction. Greatest value is for that. My last point on this session, and it'll be very brief, we also have legal pieces that are a little different from the other jurisdictions. We had pulled the plug for 11 years. We still have some violations of that. That'll happen. Because we're also in containment, we face more of that decontamination. Some people think we need to be decontaminating everything because everything's high risk. And that's not the case. This goes back to Matt's point in the last set of questions. So as you get a more complex program, if there are AIS, especially invasive mussels in your jurisdiction, that complicates things. We are working actually to decomplicate that now after having been through this for about 10 years, sort of back to where Matt's saying we ought to go. So just as a look forward for other jurisdictions, if you're contemplating legislation, do that environmental scan. But here's the watchword. Don't do the environmental scan as, oh, by the way, we need to do one and we need it by 3 o'clock on Friday. That's not the right way to do an environmental scan. And my cheeky advice to lawmakers is don't ask your staff to do it that way if you expect to have a law that you can be proud of. The way to write these things is very contemplative and test these things, and that's done through this kind of framework. And my apologies if that's candid advice, but it's candid advice without fear or favor.
Thanks, Jeff. I think one of the things that is really positive to me is that we're starting to see behavior change. And I think at the end of the day, that's really the driver and what we want to accomplish, right? That is going to be the most effective change in the long term. And so, for us who are always trying to see, things glass half full and up against many challenges, I think that's a really positive thing to mention. We also talked about, the relationships and the touch points and the points of contact between all of the jurisdictions. And we're here talking about watercraft inspection, but there's been mention throughout the day about all of the other areas where we have those contacts and connections, whether it be through monitoring or through response and lessons learned. And I think that every one of us in the room who are speaking from AIS programs through various parts of our career and as we move forward have relied on the folks in the room or online, and will continue to reach out because we have those relationships and we've had the opportunity to get to know each other and trust each other, which can also be really big in this business as well. And so it allows for things like constructive criticism. If we do have feedback to share with other jurisdictions, it creates a safe opportunity and a trusting opportunity for us to be able to have those hard discussions because we're all striving for the same goal, right? We all want improvement. We're open to continuing to better our respective programs moving forward. So one of the other things that we talked about today, and Brendan's presentation highlighted kind of the distance that people are willing to transport their watercraft and travel for watercraft. And, Jeff mentioned it as well, that if you're traveling from Ontario to British Columbia, you're going to expect to see many watercraft inspections along the way. Likewise, in the United States, moving across states, whether you're moving from the Midwest to the coast or whatever the case may be. And Cindy, you kind of mentioned a passport. Given current efforts to reduce interprovincial trade barriers, why are multiple watercraft inspections still required across borders? And could a passport style system effectively reduce the need for those repeated inspections? Or could you maybe kind of talk about some of the challenges around implementing systems like that?
So I'll just speak quickly to the passport system. So again, this doesn't mean that you can pass a station, right? If you hold a passport. What it means is you've made a commitment to clean, drain, dry, and you acknowledge it, and you've signed that piece of paper, which is part of community-based social marketing, right? If you've signed and committed, then you might actually follow through. And that just means when you pull up at our inspection station, whether it's Martina's in Golden or mine further up the highway, you will still be inspected, but we're going to see your passport, and we're probably going to skip over all that messaging about what clean, drain, dry is, what the impact of invasive mussels are, and just save a little bit of time that way. So I really feel that it's important that we all continue to do inspections. It's like these concentric circles from province and states of protection. And we're relying on humans out there who, as Tom said earlier, you could be out there for a 10-hour day in 30 degrees Celsius, very high Fahrenheit temperatures. You're tired and mistakes happen and you can miss those mussel boats. And so having those concentric circles of inspections and protection, I think, is still necessary.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it earlier this morning, but BC being, often the end destination, and so we're receiving boats that have been through multiple inspections, and absolutely we do get boaters that come through frustrated. They're traveling, this is adding, potential delays to their travels, and we understand that. And the message that I'm always, reiterating, whether it's to our own inspectors, is that it comes back to that, kind of layered approach and layers of defense. And there can be a whole multitude of reasons why, whether the boat's been partially decontaminated. We've all experienced pressure washers don't always work on the side of a highway. And so it may be that, and through tools like issuing an order and sealing a boat and having it addressed at the destination, those are some of the tools to help us be able to deal with, kind of some of the challenges that can come up in the field. And those are really very real situations. We've seen instances where the key's already at the destination. So an engine flush can't be done while that boat's being transported. So, those intercepting jurisdictions are going to do what they can while that boat's being transported. But at the end of the day, that's where we work together to send the information and share with each other what could be done. And then we know, as the kind of receiving jurisdiction, how we can best prepare to address that. And I think it really reiterates that, we're going to do our best to create those efficiencies. But at the end of the day, there's strength in that, kind of taking that kind of perimeter defense approach and having those multiple, kind of layers. And it's never intended to point fingers that, this jurisdiction missed this, because there's, again, all those different reasons why we need to kind of look at it at different points in travel. Mussels can move while boats are being transported, so they may not be visible when they're first leaving a jurisdiction. So I think there's many of those different reasons to continue to kind of reiterate the importance of those multiple checkpoints.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, I think anytime, and it's happened multiple times a year for me, where I have a member of the public or a stakeholder ask about a passport system. I think, Jeff, we brought this up yesterday. We're having a bit of a conversation about it, and I think Jeff hit the nail on the head when he said, well, you got to define what the term is before you move the conversation forward, because I think when people talk about a passport system for watercraft, they could mean a multitude of different things. It could mean kind of what Cindy has described in terms of what Alberta is implementing. In Saskatchewan, we issue a watercraft inspection certificate that provides some important information related to the inspection that was completed, whether the boat was decontaminated at the inspection station at that time, and any other information that might be beneficial to either the boat owner or actually the next inspection station in another jurisdiction that this person might encounter. The other form of the passport system that comes up occasionally for me is a system where you get inspected one place, and once you have that, as long as you haven't used your boat anywhere, you should be able to freely travel within the region without having to be inspected again. And that is problematic for us on a number of fronts. And I hope it actually was touched on in a number of occasions throughout a number of the presentations today as to exactly why that's a problem. But I will reiterate very, very quickly why for us in Saskatchewan, it's really important that a boat is inspected in Alberta and then is inspected in British Columbia. The biggest reason is we have humans doing the watercraft inspection. We all have great days and we all have bad days. We all have days where we're not going to miss a single grain of sand in the carpet of a boat. We're going to have a day. You saw anybody who was over at the displays over there. Some of the displays, we have a jar that looks like it's empty. That is, Brennan is convinced it's full of veligers. Yeah. You also have different life stages of the mussel over there, which, as you can see, some of them are literally just about the size of a large grain of sand. Okay. It's important for us that that boat continually gets inspected as many times as it needs to along that way, or as many times as it can, to ensure that we are comprehensively assessing the risk of that boat and determining whether or not that risk was appropriately identified along that inspection pathway. And why that is super helpful for us in Saskatchewan is oftentimes we're either Manitoba or us are the first people encountering watercraft that are coming through. We've got multiple checks to assess our own effectiveness. We get communications from Alberta and from BC and vice versa on boats that we've encountered at multiple times along the inspection pathway. It's great for us to find out, hey, look, just so you know, you missed something on this boat, and we're just letting you know we caught it, but we want you to know what was missed. We can go back to, we can either talk to that inspector individually, or we may actually need to reassess our training program and use that as an opportunity for continual improvement of our own training that we're doing for our inspectors. So
maybe I'll just add that there's also measures that, and actually we did do one a few years ago across Western Canada with the secret boater exercise, which is the ability to kind of do a bit of a like QA/QC and to exactly Matt's point, check in on our respective programs and see, and we had an evaluation form associated with that where the individuals that was going through had a checklist to see what was being done at each of those inspection stations. And it's every year for us, we are constantly reviewing and refining how we're delivering our training and how can we better, kind of work with our inspectors, as it's been pointed out already. Like, they're seasonal. They may be there for 1 year. They're under, operating under tough conditions. And how can we help to, kind of strengthen those tools? And I think there's been similar work done in the States doing some of those kind of QA/QC exercises. And I think, continual improvement, there's different ways that we can try to approach that as well.
And I think Martina forgot to add, when we did do that Manitoba all the way to British Columbia QA/QC secret boater exercise, she forgot to let her conservation officers know. And so the boater went through 2 stations, but he broke his seal so he could go through the next station, and they were able to track that, and they were calling officers who were on overtime trying to fight forest fire. So important message, if you're going to do a cross Canada QA/QC exercise, make sure you don't keep it too much of a secret. But yeah, it was really, really good opportunity for all of us across the provinces to, see how well we're doing in training our staff is what it comes down to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think from an operational perspective, just as an indication of that continuous improvement and evolution as programs, grow. When we started our program, our training was 6 days, and it's now up to 2 full weeks. So, we've continued to add bits and pieces to continue to strengthen, the abilities of our inspectors as much as we can. Again, there's always challenges around staff availability and having to kind of retrain seasonal staff, but certainly that continuous improvement is certainly a big part of our training and development of our program. I'll maybe pause here. Let's maybe open it up to the room. Jeff, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I will add something quickly. We rely on each other. So inconveniencing people as they stop because we don't know what's happened in between is a real thing. And this is a 5-legged stool. It could take 1 leg out and it's still a stable stool. It's a chair, then a 3-legged stool. But you keep taking those supports out and suddenly you don't have a stool, you just have a mess on the floor. And so we're relying on each other as this sort of fabric of inspection. We're not always going to be open, and maybe Saskatchewan is the first line of defense. So we can't just sort of say, well, you know what, we're gonna coordinate this for the, let's say 4 times, 5 times the 20,000 inspections. There's 100,000 inspections that happen across Western Canada, but we're going to rearrange our schedule so that one person only has to do 3 inspections on a journey. I'm afraid that there is an element of, if this is the choice you're making to travel across this route, this is the way it's going to work. Because we have a larger mandate here, which is the protection of things for a long time, not for the single convenience of an individual.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, any questions from the room or online?
Question for you, Tom. I thought I heard you said that Montana bans the transportation of surface water. And how does your agricultural industry operate within that confines? I mean, in Saskatchewan, we're doing that from, all summer. We're hauling water all the time.
Yes, sir. Good question. Enforcement is a challenge, and our focus is on watercraft. Fire operations are addressed through our Department of Resources and Conservation, so that's covered. Agriculture, the intent is moving water to other water, right? And that's the intent. And I think that's how we've got around that with the agriculture side of things, because you're not taking water from a ditch and putting it in another ditch in a different drainage, The intent of the law is surface water for the movement and introduction of aquatic invasive species.
I'll note that Manitoba has similar prohibitions on movement of surface water, but we have exemptions for certain things. Again, for firefighting, I'm quite happy if water bombers pick up water with zebra mussels and pour it on a forest fire. I'm not concerned about the well-being of that zebra mussel. And we have protocols for cleaning firefighting equipment afterwards. So there's reasonable grounds for that prohibition to be exempt in the first instance. We can exempt it in other instances. And if there's provisions for moving water in a water tank. It's where it comes from and where it's going. So to Tom's point there, I think this can be looked at with sound legislation and thoughtful advanced deliberation about what you are trying to constrain and what the intention is. Good law is clear about its intention before it's drafting.
Hi, my name is Tyler Bryan. I'm the Habitat Stewardship Director at Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds, which is a nonprofit organization here in Saskatchewan. I was kind of curious, the utilization of social media can be an incredible, powerful platform. And in my mind, I think a lot of government agencies and different organizations kind of underutilize it. And they often utilize like grassroots initiatives, which I think are great. I mean, especially having that face-to-face contact with people is a wonderful opportunity. But social media and also just having that repetition of messaging is really helpful to kind of shape and shift thinking and concerns. So I'm just kind of wondering what different states and provinces are kind of looking forward into utilizing social media.
That's a great question. I'll just obviously speak from the Saskatchewan perspective on this. First of all, we do have Ministry of Environment does have social media. We have a Facebook page, and I think just very recently we added Instagram as well. That's managed through our communications department. I will say it can sometimes be a challenging media for government to leverage for a whole variety of reasons. But what we have found as a great opportunity to circumvent some of the challenges that we have is to partner with organizations like the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds. Leverage their platforms to share out some of the messaging that we're wanting to distribute through avenues like social media. We often find one of the advantages of working with our partners on social media as well is they know their stakeholder base significantly better than we do, and rightfully so. So they actually understand how to craft a particular message so that it resonates with the individuals and the stakeholders that they represent. And so it's an effective way for us to leverage social media without having to directly utilize it ourselves in terms of that messaging. And it's certainly not to suggest we don't use our own social media platforms for AIS education and awareness. I think it's one of the dominant things that continually pops up on our own social media. But we also see huge opportunity in partnering when it does come to social media, because we find it's significantly more effective when that message is coming from that third party. And like I said, their ability to craft that message in a way that's going to resonate with the stakeholders that they represent is a huge advantage to us, and something that we're always very willing to partner with groups.
Yes, this is John Brendan. As the governor's representative to Penwar, this is for Tom Woolf. Tom, we have a lot of firefighters, especially around Missoula area with scoops. And they've gone into Canada, and they've gone into many other states. How do we, when they come back to Montana and then they fight fires in Montana, do we have a program for those planes to check them out for invasive mussels?
Yes, sir. And good to hear from you, John. Yes, so DNRC has their decontamination protocols for fire operations, as well as Forest Service and Bureau of Reclamation, or Bureau of Land Management. So yes, they have protocols, and it's enforced by those agencies.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you very much.
I'll maybe just, if I could, just quickly go back to the social media piece and kind of maybe get you to elaborate a little bit on the challenges of using CDD. And so just what I mean by that is, Brendan was talking about non-compliance with CDD rates, and we talked a little bit about it during the interactive sessions about how people think they know what clean, drain, dry means. And so sometimes when you have something that pops up on social media, oh, clean, drain, dry, I know what that means. You don't really read the rest, and we tend to kind of gloss over and skip over the rest. But clean, drain, dry, and decontaminate can be very nuanced. And so you really have to understand what clean, drain, dry means in order for it to be effective. Do you maybe want to touch on that, or just elaborate a little bit about why that can
Can I?
Sure, go ahead, Jeff.
Can I start with that? So in Manitoba, we just have one of our youngest people run a TikTok account. They say basically whatever they like. We figured that's actually we don't. We do run an organic social media feed, and we pay for social media, and we create our own in streams, and they land on our webpage, and we have fairly good uptakes. We measure that to see. So I think the important thing is not to look at social media to do things that it can't do. And as a older fellow, I struggle with the expectations, but I've come to the realization that it's the doorbell. It's not everything. It just sort of gets you in the door. And what you have to do is use that social media and repetition. I don't remember the fellow's name who asked the original question. My apologies. Is the repetition is important, so people are aware of the thing, but that doesn't make them experts in the thing. And that's probably the biggest challenge with social media is if you find something on social media, suddenly you're an expert in it because you read something somebody else wrote. That is a separate societal challenge. But for us, I think we need to recognize we need to keep pushing the message about these things, but that and how we explain those things is a different thing. So if you think about my continuum from my presentation, if you recall it, we might have a social media post that makes people aware of CDD. But when you get to an inspection station, and Matt has raised this, that's where the inspector tells people what's happening. And those touch points are important. And this is why you can't replace these complex pieces with a single gadget that does it all. That's my view of the social media. It's important for getting people in the tent. And then once they're in the tent, you need different waiters to serve the hors d'oeuvres and to set them at their proper place and so on.
Thanks, Jeff. We have another question from the room.
Thanks, James Litley from the Okanagan Basin Water Board. I just was hoping that each panelist could clarify in your jurisdiction whether watercraft coming in are required to stop for an inspection, regardless of whether they pass an open inspection station, or whether it's just if you have an open inspection station. And if it's the second, are you moving toward mandatory inspections for all watercraft? And because this is a survey across Penwar, if anyone knows the answer for Washington, I'd love to have that too.
Well, I'll first speak on behalf of Washington. No, I'm just joking. For Saskatchewan, we do require mandatory inspection for anybody who does pass an inspection station that's open, like you touched on. I think that that's pretty routine across the Penwar region. Everybody has essentially adopted that regulation. We also have a mechanism in Saskatchewan for an officer to provide direction for inspection. So if there's an officer encounters a watercraft, all of our officers are capable of completing inspection, but can require inspection for that watercraft. That's where we sit right now in Saskatchewan. We are currently going through a regulatory modernization process as every set of regulations goes through periodically. Aquatic invasive species is a top priority for us in terms of that regulatory modernization piece. And we are actively engaging with the public and our stakeholders and other government and non-government partners on our inspection. We are working with our partners to better understand how effective our inspection station is to help inform things like, do we need to make a shift in our legislation related to mandatory inspections as well too? And I'll just quickly point to, like, I often get questions about how effective do you think your inspection program is. We can actually answer those questions through a number of different mechanisms. The sharing of information is one way. But I'll just maybe quickly tell a very, very quick story. We had a group organically form out of Lake Diefenbaker called the Lake Diefenbaker Task Force. If you're not familiar with that reservoir, it's a 100-mile long reservoir, significant infrastructure and assets. We have hydro there, a lot of irrigation. We divert water into a whole other system to support industry and municipal water use. They were very concerned about the risk of zebra mussels to the reservoir, rightfully so. It is one of the top concerns from us from a water body perspective in terms of risk. They wanted to start an inspection program. It wasn't mandatory, but they wanted that opportunity to have that touch point and ask if people would be willing to submit to a voluntary inspection. Of course, we're very happy. We were very happy to support that. We provided some funding. We provided training and assistance and kind of helped them organize their program. They operated for an entire summer, actually had a lot of interactions. We have a lot of watercraft utilizing and high-risk watercraft as well too, sailboats and the like that are making their way into Saskatchewan. We were able to connect with them at the end of the year. We were able to see all of their data. We were able to kind of sit down and have a really good conversation on the effectiveness of our program. And one of the things that I have to say, I was a bit shocked myself, but every single watercraft that they interacted with had actually already been stopped by a watercraft inspection station in one of our jurisdictions, predominantly the stations that we have in Saskatchewan. So it is something that we're routinely checking in on. Mandatory inspection obviously can be very burdensome on individuals, especially if we're not able to immediately inspect them upon coming into the province. And that's something that we really need to contemplate and consider before enacting legislation like that. But it is something that we are looking at in Saskatchewan, have not made any sort of decision as to what the future state is going to look like though. But at present, that's what it looks like right now.
So I think, James, you're probably familiar, but very similar for us in British Columbia. So it is mandatory to stop at any open inspection station along the travel route. One piece that maybe I'll just reiterate is that this applies to all types of watercraft. So whether it's motorized or non-motorized, so your paddle boards, your canoes, your kayaks, and there's no, differentiating between those types of watercraft. And, that's a question that we often get asked is, does that apply? And to, just not just your trailered boats. And a few years back, we modified our signs to make it clear that it applies to all types. An area that, speaking to kind of the importance of the outreach and education is we track compliance at our inspection stations, and we do see that the majority of our boats that aren't stopping are non-motorized. And so this is an area that we see as wanting to continue to raise that awareness in terms of, what it applies to. And in terms of the requirement to be inspected prior to launch. Very similar to Saskatchewan, it's something that we're certainly evaluating. I really appreciated Jeff's comment earlier about, needing to take the time to, kind of do that evaluation. I would say even in the last, 2 days of all the conversations we've been having here, it's bringing forward a lot of new questions and things to contemplate. And I think that's really where, taking the appropriate time to look at what our respective jurisdictions may or may not have in place and what we're all contemplating and looking at. And so we had a window last year to do some very targeted amendments to our legislation that brought in a permanent solution for pull the plug. But we recognize the need for more time to look at what additional tools we want to bring in. And so that's work that we have ongoing.
Mandatory inspection before launch in Montana.
Alberta, we got a little spicy, and as of May 1st, between May 1st and October 1st, if you were transporting a watercraft from the east or the south, you are required to be inspected. And so you have 7 days. So it's the onus is on the watercraft transporter to figure out where the stations are and when they're open. Otherwise, they have to report to us within 7 days. And then if you're coming in from the west, we have 3 stations along the western border with British Columbia. Those are mandatory when we are open. So not unlike the other provinces. And we really jacked up our fines as well for passing a watercraft inspection station that's open. It is now $4,200 if you have your canoe on top and you're tired and you forget and you blow past. It's a pretty hefty fine.
Sweet. And just for entering Canada, so there's 2 things that are important to know. So the first one is we have 6 banned species from entering Canada, and that is, of course, zebra and quagga mussels, as well as the 4 invasive carps. So any watercraft entering Canada with those present would be forced to not enter Canada. And then as part of that audit that happened in 2019, one of the outcomes was actually a memorandum, which the Canada Border Service Agency is using kind of operationally. Memorandum D-19-8-5 rolls right off the tongue. And that memorandum is really the operational implementation of clean, drain, and dry. So it's not federal policy. It's not federal legislation. That's something that we are considering updating through our AIS regulation. But as of right now, watercraft entering Canada are supposed to be clean, drained, and dried. And obviously, as my presentation kind of spoke to, there are some challenges there for sure, but CBSA has training, and we continue to work with them to try to refine that and make sure that watercraft entering are hitting that standard.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I thought I got a pass because we're not in Penwar, but as part of the non-survey, maybe this is a bit of a challenge function to the question. We have mandatory inspection, but it goes to when our stations are open. And so this question is an interesting contradistinction to the previous one. Hey, wait a sec, if there's 10 stations and we're making people stop, like what's with that? And then at the same time, it's let's force everybody to stop in places that we don't have capacity to do. So that to me is a much larger strategic discussion. And I'm glad actually they're raised in the panel, not for us to solve, but as subject matter experts to say, these things actually don't align particularly well with each other. You can't be cutting things out and adding more of the same thing at the same time and expect people to comprehend that as a well-considered macro initiative. So at this point, I'm not speaking for our minister or our cabinet. I've just heard nothing about changing anything apart from the rules we've got currently, which is you stop when our stations are open. Similarly to Saskatchewan, we also have other authorities. It's not just our officers, our inspectors, which is a lower level of training. They can also issue orders. And those orders are effectively, you go get something done. It could be a decontamination, or we can stop you from doing certain things. Those are already significant powers, but we have to intercept people. We realize there's a gap. We understand the intention of mandatory inspection, but we also recognize that needs to be seen in the broader context of, is the fabric of inspection we've got adequate or not, and is that the right way of treating that?
Thanks, Jeff. So considering that we're here with Penwar and we've talked a lot about the economics today and the costs of introductions of invasive mussels and other aquatic invasive species, can the panel touch on some of the economic push and pull factors associated with movement of watercraft within the region, especially when significant AIS risks are present? And then to follow how leaders can balance the economic stimulus of watercraft-related industries with the social and environmental benefits of protecting vulnerable water bodies.
Wow, what a great question, Jeri. No, I already in my presentation, I talked about how rec angling was the biggest driver for watercraft traffic entering Canada. These people are driving very far distances. They're staying in hotels in the United States, in Canada. They're buying gas, food, fuel, bait locally, or else because you can't bring in bait outside your jurisdiction in most cases. Those are all really important recreational or economic drivers. We know through work done throughout Canada that recreational fishing is quickly becoming, if not already overtaking, commercial fishing as the number one source of potential revenue. So these are all really important factors. So when we talk about the impacts to people and their time, there is an end goal there. That end goal is they're going to go spend money. They're going to go do rec fishing. They're going to support local tourism. A lot of those places that I highlight on my map in Northwestern Ontario and Northwestern Manitoba, recreating is the number one driver of the economy. This is so important to them. And the people that are coming up from the United States, making their way to these destinations, they see that value. They understand that they're going here to do a certain thing. And it's really weird to be thanked as a public servant for what I'm doing. But like people are really excited to see us a lot of the time. And I think that's rare. If you ask a bunch of my colleagues here who might not be doing such interesting and fun work at the international border and inspecting watercraft. So I think people understand that there is value in doing this work, and that's awesome to see. And they're willing to pay that cost in order to keep that recreational fishing going. I've literally spoken to people who are traveling with 3 generations of the car. You got grandpa, dad, and son, and they've been doing this for the last 60 years, and they would love to keep doing it for the next 60.
I'll say that's a very old son or a very, 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 if he's 60 years.
Jeff, sorry, go ahead, Jeff. Were you gonna weigh in?
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, Brendan. I think that's really important that there's a cultural social value, and I was just taking a bit of a shot at the age structure. But I know in Manitoba there was a study. It's an okay study, but on the value of stock trout waters to Western Manitoba, and there's a fairly high return on investment, somewhere in that $30 of return for every dollar spent. So I think at the macro level, again, if there's an income to be generated, it comes with some cost. And as Brendan said, the protection side of it, that's what we're doing, is the necessary cost to continue supporting that recreational activity and that economic stimulus. And they just go hand in hand. You just can't responsibly have one without the other. I will steal somebody else's simile. You don't build a suburb with no schools, no hospitals, no fire hydrants, no drains. At some point, there are these costs associated with these kind of economic activities, and that's the responsible way to do it.
I'll just maybe quickly say, when you're talking about push and pull, Jeri, we in Saskatchewan, we're just this year implementing an angling habitat certificate, and the entirety of that, the revenue generated from that is going into the Fish and Wildlife Development Fund. That's the fund that we actually use for core funding for our aquatic invasive species program. So it's a way for anglers that are accessing and benefiting and utilizing our fisheries resource, which, by the way, is probably the best in Canada. I'm not biased on that or anything, but we do get, as even Brendan's data show, we got people traveling to northern Saskatchewan to fish our quality lakes. It's just been when you roll out something like this, it's an additional cost to anglers, right? You never quite know just exactly how anglers across the board are gonna take this. And it was really interesting to me to see the overwhelming response of positivity when they found out that all of that additional funding was going to this fund, knowing that that fund provides the core funding to this aquatic invasive species program. And in fact, your comment around social media earlier, social media is a great venue for people to voice how they really feel about something. Somebody had sent me a thread from one of the fishing forums on I think it was on Facebook, and where somebody had spoken about this, and there was several very angry people talking about how this is pricing them out of angling, and this is, and I can't believe that there's an additional fee being added, and you should have seen the people from, that fish Saskatchewan, that benefit from the fisheries resource, that actually understand the value of this back to the AIS program, stepping in and defending this, and having that conversation within that venue. It was really, really amazing. So from a push-pull perspective, and to add to kind of what Jeff was saying, anglers appreciate the risk that things like zebra mussels pose to the resource that they benefit from every time they go to try and utilize it from that perspective. And because they see that value being put back into things like prevention to ensure that those resources are protected long term for the generations to come, like the comment that Brendan made, we really see that willingness to stop at inspection stations, that willingness to take that extra step to pull their drain plugs out of their boats, that extra step to drain their live wells and use one of those chamois like are over on that counter to get every last drop out of those dry wells, to ensure that when they are traveling to and from different water bodies, that they're not posing that risk. And to pay that additional money in Saskatchewan for that angling habitat certificate, knowing what that's doing is that is bolstering our program, and it's ensuring that that program has that long-term funding to continue to deliver on those prevention efforts that, obviously, based on the conversations around the table, I hope everybody has appreciated, are critically important to keeping these species out of the Penwar region. So,
Thanks, Matt. Okay, and so maybe just to wrap up, I think we're just about at time. I have one last question for you. What does success look like in strengthening aquatic invasive species response across the region, for you specifically?
I think there's that could be a very, very lengthy response. But I'll just provide maybe a glimpse into what success looks like for me, beyond just another year of keeping high risk invasive species out of our jurisdiction. That's obviously the metric of success that we continually point to. But another piece of success that I would point to is, and that's maybe less understood by people in the room, less so by the panel, but success to me is, from a prevention perspective, is the collaboration that goes on behind the scenes that isn't so regularly broadcasted to the public and to the stakeholders around the coordination that we actually have within this region. And I'll provide an example of prevention success as it relates to that. Jeff and I we're colleagues. We're also really good friends, and we have a lot of trust in one another. And I would echo that. I have that same level of trust for everybody else that's on this panel. We have built that trust through developing relationships over time, working through hard times together, helping to troubleshoot issues and challenges as they come up within our respective regions. And a metric of success for me in terms of prevention is when Jeff picks up the phone and calls me and says, "Hey, we have to make a change in our program, and it's going to open you to more risk. And I want you to know that we're doing this. I want you to know why we're doing it. And I want you to be able to have that information before we do it, so that if you feel that that risk has created a challenge for you that isn't already addressed by your existing strategic plan, that you have the ability to make a change to address it." That to me is a success in prevention that, like I said, is not something that necessarily ends up on a presentation, but that exists in the Penmar region, and is something that is ongoing and is critically important to our success overall in continuing to prevent introductions of these species.
Yes, very, very well said, Matt. And I would certainly echo that. And of course, our collective top, kind of measure of success is, continuing to see that we're staying on the, continuing to stay on the prevention side. And I think, there's different metrics that we can look at to see how that's kind of being achieved. I think what we've really heard is that importance of kind of seeing that continued increase in, achieving the clean, drain, dry. And so what are the ways that we can look at how we're sort of measuring that? And I think, there's also ways of looking at how we're hopefully seeing things like compliance trending in the right direction. And so, we've seen through things like improving our signage and again, bringing that awareness, we see that, things like compliance of stopping at the inspection stations, we continue to see that incremental kind of increase. So I think also looking at, how are we kind of reporting out what those different kind of measures look like? And I think, when we see trends like your number of high risk inspections going down, I think that's something that's really, and maybe that means that there's a higher number in another jurisdiction, but when it comes over to BC, that number is actually lower for us in BC. So I think we need to look at our numbers both within our own jurisdictions, but collectively as a region to see what are we achieving across our programs, because I think when we look at the numbers in totality, not just in isolation, it can tell a very interesting story. And I think that's part of what is the benefit of these groups, is that we can collectively look at what are the trends that we're seeing. And I mean, there's only so much that we can draw from it. There are going to be elements that are out of our control that may be driving, how boats are being moved, things like gas prices increasing may change how far these boats are being moved. But there's a lot that we can look at our programs to say, hey, what are these shifts over time? And we have quite interesting data sets over long periods of time that are really valuable and interesting to share and look at and see what those trends are. And I think those are quite interesting metrics of success, is looking at how those numbers have evolved over time and how we can learn from them.
You guys are so good. So I've been doing this. I've been doing this for about 20 years now. And it physically hurts me when a new mussel population pops up. I mean, it's just that chink in the armor that just continues. But the movement of mussels west into Western Canada, into the Western states, north from California into Montana, out of California and into the West, that's going to happen by people, right? So these are people that are ill-informed or not following the rules, who are physically moving these things from one place to another. So that is an opportunity, right? Like, we can interrupt that somehow together, working on messaging, working with our partners. Like, it's not inevitable these things move around. So that gives me hope, and that would be success if we can collectively hold the line on those.
And for me and for what success looks like, I think it's this continued collaboration that you see across multiple jurisdictions, provinces, states, First Nations, federal governments, all working together, talking about this, having these strong relationships. I mean, even I think it was this morning, I had a notification in my inbox about a high-risk watercraft from Colorado. Or maybe it wasn't Colorado. It was Lake Havasu that was traveling back to Alberta, right? So those connections and those networks, working with Tom back when he was in Idaho, they helped us set up our program when we had nothing in Alberta. And so just building off of all of those learnings and lessons and everything like that has been so valuable, so important. We share an inspection station at the Coots watercraft or Coots POE. I remember he contacted me years ago saying, we'd like to pay our staff more money to go on the eastern border where it's more high risk, but then we have to be at Sweetgrass. And so we worked out this collaboration where we'll inspect for you. We're there anyway. We're not that busy. So I think those relationships and that collaboration is really what success looks like for me.
I agree with everyone, and I'll yield my time to Jeff.
I didn't expect that. Thank you. Success is two things. It's the inputs that we've talked about. Sure, we're going to emphasize things that we already value, like these relationships. I completely agree. I think they're really important. I think we are stronger together. I think Manitoba is not part of Penmore and has been invited since 2015, if I recall. That's a remarkable invitation to an outsider, because Penmore is clearly seeing that there's value in hearing from the outside, as it were. I think looking at jurisdictional boundaries is a bit artificially problematic. We all represent jurisdictions, so we have to do that. But the value of this is we're looking at this independent of borders. Their borders get in the way. Borders also help. But at some point, the fact Manitoba has zebra mussels in some of its waters doesn't mean Manitoba has zebra mussels in all its waters. And that doesn't mean because Saskatchewan is beside Manitoba that suddenly anything with a Manitoba plate or a Saskatchewan plate is universally risky. And I think the strength of our connectiveness and working together are the inputs, and the outcome of success, not the outputs. Lots of inspections, and those numbers give us outputs. And I understand why that's important, but those are not the real deal. The outcome, and I agree with Tom, it hurts when you get an invasion. When you get a detection, my monitoring guy doesn't want to tell me. He just goes, I don't want to do this. Because it always happens on a Friday at 3:00. And since it's 4:00 Manitoba time, and we're past that witching hour, I think we're good for another week. We're still ice on, so I think we're okay. But that's when they happen. Or Monday morning when the administration of things seem to be going haywire. Those are the only two times. The outcome is that we don't have any more of this pain inflicted on us, because we do take these things personally. Even though we've professionalized these relationships and these programs, people don't play goalie in hockey to get the scoring championship. Goalies are kind of nuts because they have to do this almost impossible to win game. Goalies would make good AIS program managers in some ways, because it's the same sort of approach. You don't get to win, you just help not lose. And yet that takes a certain emotional psyche, and it takes a certain emotional toughness. So if we have outcomes that no new bad thing arises, we can take great comfort in that, where other people may not see it as success. For that, we would see that as a great success. And I think we can get there. I truly think we can get there, but it takes clenching stomach muscles of hope. Hope is not a plan, so we need more than hope, but we hope that our good planning works and our collaboration works, and the constant, persistent, unrelenting effort across messaging, inspection, training, response, getting rid of invasives where we can, managing them where we can, containing them where we can, all of that stuff just keeps happening. And that takes the collective will, and it takes a little bit of bolstering from supporters that I know are in that room. I've met some of them. And I would like to say, if it's my last thing here, is the support from decision makers, legislators, senators, Congress. There's been support in that room that I have seen. I've experienced it personally. And I think that those decision makers, ministers, MLAs, MPs, you should all be thanked for bringing this together and hearing this message, because we know that you have to make decisions, and it is important for you to understand that there's value to us for you to recognize the value of these programs. That's how I see success. Thank you.